It's not a matter of what you get done, it's a matter of what you get right. And that's the most important thing. And this is why they set the balance of powers up. History Matters, the Constitution and Powers. This is where the rubber meets the road. Article 1, Section 1. Limited and enumerated powers. Congress has authority only over the subject matter specified in the Constitution. Now, we have gone so far afield from what this says and what this means. But let's talk a little bit about how this happened and how this came to be, and hopefully some of the things that we might do to fix this. Okay, so we had significant debates on a lot of things. What should the federal government do? What jurisdiction? What are the things that are specified in the Constitution that are supposed to be accomplished by the legislature? One of the big controversial ones is banking. Now, this is where I referred to Hamilton, where he, wanted to have a really strong central bank. Now, the United States, as a federation, was supposed to coin money, supposed to control the money. But very early on in our history, we gave that banking away to private banks. Now, we went back and forth 3 times with this. It was taken away, and it was then put back into, we had the First National Bank, and then we had the Second National Bank, and then we had the Federal Reserve. So we've gone back and forth. And why is this so important? Well, it's all about the money. It's about the power of the money in our country, and who creates a coinage and who controls where that money is. And we've seen all of the economic chaos that have come from not being able to control our own money. And now we have a Congress that is pretty much out of control because they think they can print the money. Well, in essence, they sort of kind of can, but the Federal Reserve is the real power. And that's where we have a problem. Now, it wasn't supposed to start out that way, but you'll find throughout our history, the Supreme Court has made various decisions that have shifted the Constitution on us. A little here, a little there. And we want to talk about how that has happened. Now, I put some references down here on some of the early court cases in 1819 that shifted what was happening and how Congress kind of nudged the ability for other forces external to the Congress to be able to take over this capability. This is how it should work. Checks and balances. We've all talked about the checks and balances and the way that the president, the executive, the judicial, the legislative are supposed to work together. Now, there was a little bit of planning in how the Founding Fathers set this up, because they realized that if you had these 3 groups, there would be a certain amount of animosity, there would be a certain amount of resistance, and that was good. A lot of people say, we're not getting anything done, we're not moving on. That's okay. It's not a matter of what you get done, it's a matter of what you get right. And that's the most important thing. And this is why they set the balance of powers up. But I want to talk a little bit about the history of how we got to this position. In the balance of powers, we had certain things reserved to the states and certain things reserved to the national government. But there's this gray area in the middle. And sometimes that kind of gets in the way. And again, going back to the fact that states are sovereign entities. This book in 1748 is what many of the founders read. Now, the Catholic Church did not like this man. The reason was, in his view of power, he did not include the clergy. He felt that the clergy should not be involved in the power of the state, but that the state should have this legislative, executive, and judicial balance of power, but not the clergy. So in 1751, his book was banned by the Vatican, but it was very well received in both England and the American colonies. And from this concept, our constitutional founding fathers found some interesting ways of developing a new government. Separation of powers. It was a brand new concept, and one that they thought they should implement. And it became part of the basis of how our government worked. Now, we've gone a little ways from that, and hopefully we can come back to some of it. But the most important thing we have is making sure that our Congress has their feet held to the fire. One of the problems we have, and Mike Lee has stated this, and we've talked about it on occasion, that all legislative powers need to belong in Congress. But unfortunately, sometimes Congress says, oh, we'll let the president decide. And what they do is they create a rule or a law, but they don't put a lot of detail in it. And they do that on purpose sometimes, depending on who's president and who's in the Congress and what the advantages are or the disadvantages. And they move it on to the executive and they say, you guys figure out what the rules should be. We just want you to do X. How you do it, that's up to you. They're not supposed to do that. But unfortunately, as you see at the bottom of this slide here, a bunch of Supreme Court rulings help them kind of move that along, where now the president or the executive has more power than they should have. And that's one of the reasons we get ourselves into trouble. We need to make sure the Supreme Court doesn't keep pushing that, and we need to make sure Congress doesn't keep pushing that, because the rules should be made by Congress, not by the executive. So history really does matter. And that's why history matters.